Hi there, and welcome to Off the Data Provided, interpersonal communication podcast. I'm, of course, your host, Dr. Marcus C. Shepard. On today's episode, we're going to talk about a study released earlier this year in the European Journal of Population entitled Cohabitation and Mortality Across Life Course, a longitudinal cohort study with Swedish register-based sibling comparisons. We'll talk about the study, analyze it a bit, and of course, as always, I will add my 2 cents. This week, we are not going to have an Ask Dr. Shepard, but if you do want to submit your questions, feel free to email me at offthedataprovided@gmail.com. Once again, that is offthedataprovided@gmail.com. So when we delve into this article, what's important to note is we've known for years that married individuals live longer than unmarried women and unmarried men, though we do know that unmarried women, of course, live longer than unmarried men. So with that said, what's interesting about this study is that they are talking about couples who cohabitate versus marriage. And so how they diversified this, or I should better word to use, is how they figured this out was they looked at sibling comparison design to offset other factors, right? They're assuming, right, siblings have similar genetic makeup and backgrounds. So to offset other potential health ailments, right, let's see how those siblings, one that married, one that maybe did not, is single or is cohabitating, align. And so with that in mind, they found that never married cohabitators had mortality risks similar to married couples, right, especially at the younger ages, though they gradually increased with age, where divorced and widowed cohabitators exhibited an age gradation in the opposite direction. So, of course, it decreased. So what is fascinating about this is the data that they went through was over 5 million different individuals, men and women, between 2012 and 2017, right, using this register data. So essentially what we know out of this research from Sweden, right, where they tried to control for pre-existing conditions, they found that cohabitators, right, of course, fell between single and married, and they worried about relationship dissolution has on the health of cohabitators in the sense of they might be more so stressed about their relationship because it is not quote unquote official. And that is what they are alleging might lead to this discrepancy. So clearly individuals who are cohabitating, who are in relationships, long-term relationships, but aren't married, are living quote unquote longer and healthier lives than individuals who aren't married, right, who are just single, but they aren't living as long as people who are married. And so that difference that the research is arguing is that little detail is because there is stress where the couple maybe, unfortunately, might tear apart, might uncohabitate. And so that is a lingering stress that exists maybe between coupled versus married. So what is fascinating to me about this is, of course, we know that when people are coupled, right, whether married or long-term romantic relationships, that their health behaviors adversely impact everyone, right? So I even know from couples I'm close to, right, a couple had a heart attack with one of the individuals, and the other partner in that committed romantic relationship, who weren't just couple but married, right, took it upon themselves to make sure that all the food, or the majority of the food that was then cooked at home, was heart healthy. So it helps to make positive changes because they're supportive environments in coupledom. So even in non-married couples, that has been found in this study to happen as well. So clearly there are, of course, partnership offers substantial benefits, right? So a partner, even just a companion, can help monitor your health, encourage adherence to medications, offer emotional support to counteract negative effects of health. So this is why even those who aren't married, though who are in couples, are living longer, this Swedish study is finding. And so the benefits, of course, of being in a couple can be expected to matter more so as health challenges pile on. And this, of course, is connected with aging. So it's not surprising that union status matters more for mortality later in life. As young adults, the study clearly argues and underscored, rarely die. And so differences between single, cohabitants, and married are consequentially smaller earlier in life. But as folks reach their 50s and 60s, they're more likely to have lifestyle changes, diabetes, heart issues, right? Hypertension, all of these things that might need to be monitored and need to be, eyed, and maybe lifestyle changes need to happen in order for these issues not to be a huge issue. And so clearly, if that burden is shared by the couple, then that, as the research has found, is easier to manage. So clearly somebody who is single in their 50s or 60s trying to manage these health issues, they might do a good job at the start, but maybe because they lack that support in the home, that daily support, it becomes harder. So clearly, what I think is interesting about this study, and I have added the link in the podcast description for you to check out if you're so interested in going through the data and the details, is that, of course, we are looking at cohabitation mainly in a romantic sense. And, of course, this data is skewed before the global pandemic has impacted our health outcomes. And we are seeing now younger individuals having major heart issues, major respiratory issues, hypertension, diabetes. All of this stuff is hitting people at younger and younger ages due to COVID and the impacts of COVID. So what I am interested in seeing, right, clearly this is a study that was released this year, but looks at data from before the pandemic. I'd be fascinated to see information and data kind of during the pandemic, because we still are in the COVID-19 pandemic, and analyzing how that is potentially impacting health outcomes versus couples and married individuals as well as single individuals. And I would argue that probably the ailments, right, as they're saying, there's not a big difference until people hit their 50s and 60s. I would beg to argue, take an educated guess, right, that now people in their 30s and 40s, you're going to see huge differences in their health outcomes based on their partners. And in addition, these couples, if one quote unquote masks or takes COVID seriously versus one that doesn't mask or doesn't take COVID seriously, I'd be interested to also see what that means, because typically you're sharing the air. So if one person's not taking COVID seriously, it ultimately means you both aren't taking COVID seriously. And therefore you're at a high risk level as well for getting COVID and therefore long COVID. So I do agree and believe that clearly being in a couple, right, whatever that means or looks like, married, unmarried, you're going to have better health outcomes and are going to extend your life. That makes sense to me. And we've known from countless data, clearly the Swedish data, right, they are accounting for some genetic variances or differences by using this information based on siblings. So they have a shared family history. So shared genetics no longer drive potentially these differences. So while it doesn't necessarily prove that marriages cause people to live longer than cohabitation, this new research is strong evidence that it potentially could. And so we know in any type of scientific background, right, this isn't a fact. It is some evidence, and there needs to be more evidence to be compiled. And so As I said, it would be fascinating to see this evidence with more recent health data and outcomes, whether it be from Sweden, whether it be from other countries, and follow this similar metric that this study did. So take those siblings into account and then look at cohabitation. But even with cohabitation, I would be fascinated to underscore, what if it's not even romantic cohabitation? So we know that a lot of younger individuals, due to the fact that we are in certain economic strife and downturn, I would say, right? We're in a recession, whether people want to admit that or not. People are living with friends, right? Friends are living with each other or living with family members. And so does this type of companionship, does this help elicit some positive health outcomes? If you're living with your parents, are they helping you stay on top of your health and your management? And on the flip side, are you helping your parent or guardian with their health? Or friends, if you're living with friends or you have roommates, are you guys helping foster that or not? I would probably argue younger individuals are probably not doing that, just from my own casual conversations with students who would fit that bill. Some of them do have roommates, right? They're not talking about each other's health necessarily. But even talking with my students, right, a lot of them are having some serious health ailments due to COVID that you wouldn't expect to see in 20-year-olds. So it will be fascinating as their health potentially continues to decline or deteriorate in aspects due to COVID, due to long COVID. What is going to come of it? Are they going to maybe rely on coupledom or marriage to help support their health? Will that help extend their potential life that's already now been weakened by this serious virus? Will being single rapidly continue their potential health decline? These will be interesting research questions for people to consider and to think about. So clearly, right at the end of the day, there are health benefits linked to just cohabitation. And this matters, I think, a lot for our population's health, especially as we are seeing such decline in younger individuals. This goes back to this idea of communal aspects, community, which is certainly lacking. And we've talked about that before on the podcast, right? This loneliness epidemic. We know that men and women are feeling substantially lonelier than they did decades ago. These smart devices that we have alienated us from people at the same time that they promise to bring us closer to people. So clearly, I think there's a need for cohabitation to help, right, our physical health, our mental health. I would have loved to see them delve into cohabitation around platonic relationships. So clearly roommates, or even later in life, some people, they live around or by each other. Sometimes we know elderly people experience more cohabitation with elderly homes. Does that actually help extend their life care? Probably so. As we know, oftentimes those facilities have medical personnel. They have exercise, they have social programs, right? Oftentimes people who are older, they get lonelier because a lot of the people they knew aren't around anymore. Family doesn't visit them as much, or they're not around family in terms of where they live. So clearly we know that elderly people are cohabitating more, and this helps with their health. But I'd also be fascinated to see with younger individuals, is cohabitation going to be something we should maybe even push for as we move through this global pandemic? So the study, adds some new things to the data that we know, right? We've always known that married individuals clearly live longer and healthier, quote unquote, lives than non-married individuals. We also know that cohabitating partners live longer than single people. But what's fascinating, right, is this data is making an argument. Now, we're going to need a lot more data than this study, but this data is now making an argument that there is a difference between cohabitating partners and married partners. And so cohabitating partners, of course, fall between married and single people. Clearly, they're closer to married people in terms of health outcomes and extension of life, but due to potentially the stress of not a full certainty of their relationship status, that might be a degree to why maybe their health outcomes aren't as strong. Or potentially maybe those bonds aren't as strong, and therefore, even though they're on a long-term partnership, the commitment to maybe the health of we might be less so than the commitment of the health of we with a married couple, right? Because you are tied economically oftentimes as a married couple, where you are not necessarily tied in a long-term committed partnership either. So I think those are some things that I found interesting and fascinating, some things that the article doesn't necessarily fully delve into, but it is important to recognize that there are differences between partnership status and mortality. And clearly, the research, as we've known for years, has argued that we should push for more community. I would say, for me, that's my major takeaway from here, is that we need to be more so in community and we need to be supporting people. Unfortunately, we live in an individualistic society, especially in the United States of America. The American dream is pushed forward. It's you, the individual, achieving these things. And we've backed away a lot from collectivist community values. And in this time where people are lonelier and lonelier, this time where people feel disconnected, disengaged, it's obvious that things that hopefully speak and spark community can potentially help you live a longer and maybe even healthier life, depending on how you define healthier. So that is my takeaway. Of course, another point that I made before about how COVID intersects with this. Clearly, this data is pre-COVID. And so it would be fascinating for me to see what this data looks like when we take into account COVID and how that is taking a wreck to healthcare, to health of every individual, right? There was a lie fed early on in the pandemic that children, it wasn't as bad for them to get COVID, but now we have data that's come out that shows even kids who are infected with COVID just twice have a much higher risk of getting long COVID. And now long COVID, at least in the United States of America, is the number one issue impacting children, health issue impacting children. It used to be asthma. It is no longer asthma. It is long COVID. So clearly, COVID has had a shakeup on our health and our mortality rates, right? We've seen the mortality rates drop in all countries since COVID has hit. It will be interesting for me to see about cohabitation and mortality with COVID in the comparisons. So clearly they try to compare the differences between siblings as a way to make a differentiation between cohabitation and marriage. And I think that does make sense. And there should be more research there. But I also think we need to expand our idea and understanding of cohabitation. Cohabitation could be with family, it could be with friends, it could be with roommates, it could be with colleagues. And also splitting those up and maybe having a more qualitative, right, understanding and talking to people and figuring out, what do these partnerships look like? How is cohabitation defined? How does this impact health outcomes? With that said, I think it was nice to have a short and sweet episode. Clearly, we just analyzed one academic article, literally from January of 2025. And as we get ready to end the year, right, if you can believe it or not, it's November. It's almost been a whole year of this podcast. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who has been tuning in. This literally started out as just something for my students who asked for this over countless years, and it's really evolved into something much bigger than I could have ever imagined. So thank you so much for listening, and if you do have any questions, feel free to email me at offthedataprovided@gmail.com. Once again, that is offthedataprovided@gmail.com. Until the next one, have a good one.